Subeck. Brief introduction here. Well, too long. She's been active so long, so it's hard not to. She's been involved in the state and Madison politics for nearly 20 years, and an alderwoman on the Madison Common Council since 2011. Recently served as executive director of a women's health organization fighting for reproductive justice. Now she's executive director of United Wisconsin, an independent grassroots organization of citizens restoring the Wisconsin tradition of democracy in action. And their mission is very much like ours, bringing progressive values back to governing in Wisconsin. And they care about many of the same issues: campaign finance reform, taking big money out, stopping Citizens United, passing local living wage legislation, and of course, fighting back against Scott Walker's regressive agenda. I like that way to put it. And just a quick reminder, for those of you who perhaps weren't around during then, they were a leader, the organization was a leader in the recall election in 2012, collecting nearly 1 million petition signatures, the largest successful recall petition campaign in U.S. history. Let's give Lisa a big hand.
Thank you, that was quite the introduction. Hope I live up to it. So I normally like to start out with a story, but I'm going to start out with some numbers, largely because I'm afraid I'll forget them if I don't spit them out at you pretty quickly. So I'm going to go back to a couple of different elections and the turnouts. Anyone know what the turnout was for this November's presidential election? How many people voted statewide? Approximate number of voters?
1.5 million. 2 million?
Higher.
It's like a little short of 3.
Just shy of 3 million. Just shy, it's hard to say, just shy of 3 million voters voted in the November presidential election. Anyone know how many people voted 2 springs ago when Kloppenberg and Prosser were running for Supreme Court?
1.5 million.
Ding, 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 1.5 million. Should be candy or something. 1.5 million. Anyone know how many people voted in the Supreme Court race prior to that when Shirley Abramson was challenged by Randy Koshnick? I can never get his name quite right. She won, so that's the important part. But anyone have any guesses as to how many people voted in that one? It goes about
Less than a million.
What's that?
Less than a million.
Less than a million? Under 800,000. Between 750,000 and 800,000 voted in that race. Those numbers are really important because it shows why we see Tammy Baldwin and Barack Obama winning the state of Wisconsin, but we don't see Joanne Kloppenberg winning. We didn't see Louis Butler winning. Abramson won, but she was an incumbent running against a pretty weak challenger. But with a strong challenger, we do not see our people winning these spring statewide elections, and it's because the turnout drops off. We need to, if we are to beat a candidate like Pat Roggensack, like Prosser, we need to turn our people out. And we need to get them out and voting in the spring. Unfortunately, when it comes to spring elections, you know who comes out to vote? People who aren't happy about their property tax bill. That is the demographic that you see coming out and voting in spring. And we need to change that. We need those of us who believe in strong progressive values in this room. We need our neighbors who have strong progressive values. We need folks who are out there voting for Tammy Baldwin and Barack Obama, who would never miss a presidential election, to feel the same way about a spring election. They need to know that who's on the Supreme Court matters to them. They need to know who's on their city council or their county board or any of these other entities that we elect people to in the spring. People need to know just how much that matters. If I think about the things that President Obama does, and I think about the decisions that are made by the Wisconsin Supreme Court, I'm going to tell you, my life is probably more impacted by the Wisconsin Supreme Court than President Obama's decisions. That doesn't mean that I don't want, liberal presidents, but when push comes to shove and it comes to your day-to-day, the day-to-day decisions, the more local it is, the more it impacts your day-to-day life, but that doesn't translate in voter behavior on our side of the coin. So if we are to remove some of these very conservative justices, we have got to get people out and voting in spring elections. And that starts now. We have 3 weeks. And I can tell you, we at United Wisconsin are working on it. I'm going to talk a little bit about why in just a moment. But we need all of you making calls, canvassing, doing whatever it is that you are able to do to make sure that people get out and vote in this election. And we need you to talk about the things that Janice just spoke to you about and that I'm going to be speaking to you about in a few minutes. We need you to be talking to your neighbors. You know, people talk about President Obama all the time. People don't talk much about, did you hear what the Supreme Court did yesterday? Or did you hear about the case coming before, especially the state Supreme Court? Yet, it's all so important. So let me talk a little bit about why it's important. What is important about what the Supreme Court does? First off, number one, most in the news that Janice already mentioned, Act 10 is moving its way through the courts. It's been heard by some local courts, or circuit courts. It's gone to the Court of Appeals, and there it sits waiting for sort of moving through the appeals process. Once the appeals court is done with it, I can guarantee you whichever side is on the losing side of that coin is taking it up a level and is going to reach the Supreme Court. So Supreme Court will again be acting on Act 10. Imagine the court as it stands now. It has already ruled on some Act 10 cases negatively. We're not going to see anything different. If we can shift the balance on the court and make it truly a court that's a check and balance of the legislature, as opposed to a court that's simply a rubber stamp of the legislature, it will change that. So we need to be able to move the balance on the court so that it's no longer so heavy on the conservative side. But Act 10 isn't the only case. The voter ID law is working its way through the courts. Again, it's been held unenforceable at this point. But you can bet that if it makes it to the Supreme Court, how do you think Rogan-Sachs going to rule? How do you think Prosser's going to rule? How do you think Ziegler and Gableman are going to rule? They're going to rule with the legislature. And you know why? Pat Rogan-Sachs actually said it best. She told the group at a Republican Lincoln Day dinner, which, by the way, I'm not sure what this nonpartisan justice was out appearing buddy-buddy with Ron Johnson. The two of them shared the stage at a Jefferson County Lincoln Day dinner. But what she said is that it is the role of the Supreme Court to uphold the will of the legislature. How many of you took 8th grade history? Most of us, I think. 8th grade history, system of checks and balances. It is that simple. The role of the Supreme Court, or the role of the courts, is to act as a check and balance as it deals with our 3 branches of government. So to say that the role of the court is truly to uphold the will of the legislature is just beyond me. And the role of the legislature changes the will of the legislature changes all of the time. I can tell you that 4 years ago, the will of the legislature is very different than it is now. There was a time when the Dems had control of that legislature. I don't think Rogan-Sachs was actually thinking that it was her job to uphold that will back then. But now that her people are in power, that's what she thinks. And you know why she thinks so? Money. It's about who pays for her election, but we'll get to that in a second. I want to talk about a few more things about what's coming through the Supreme Court eventually. We know there have been other attacks on voter rights. We know that limits to absentee voting are going to be moving through. We know those will likely be challenged in court, and they will likely make their way to the Supreme Court. We know that Planned Parenthood is in the process of filing a state lawsuit. They first filed it at the federal level. Turned out that it should be in the state courts. They've moved it there. They may come to a settlement on it, but if they don't come to a settlement on it, you can bet that that's going to work its way up through to our state Supreme Court. And that is, at its core, one of the most fundamental basic right infringements. It's a law that the Republicans put into place that makes it impossible for a woman in a state who's in the early stages of her pregnancy to get access to a medication abortion because of a law that our state legislature put into place. That could very well make its way to the Supreme Court. Other things, though, that we don't pay any attention to, and we don't necessarily care about until it affects us, make their way to the Supreme Court, too. Things like kids with lead paint poisoning. Those sorts of cases where somebody is harmed by something that some corporation or entity out there has done, and they get a judgment, often ends up at the Supreme Court level. And who do we want making those decisions? somebody whose campaign is funded by those very corporations that have cases coming before that court, or somebody who can actually have a fair and impartial view, who has expertise in various areas of the law. I'm going to choose the person who's going to rely on their expertise, not on who gave them the money. An interesting tidbit about Pat Rogansack, who's currently up for election, obviously, is that she was the force behind what's called the Rogansack Rule. Has anyone ever heard of the Rogansack Rule? A few of you, I see a few heads nodding. The Rogansack Rule says that while the court is hearing a case, so say Chuck Corporation has been sued by Assemblywoman Greenhand, who this corporation wronged, and this case has made it to the Supreme Court. Normally, you would think that Chuck Corporation shouldn't be able to give me a campaign contribution if I'm the judge. Wrong. The Rogansack Rule, as it's been affectionately coined, actually says that justices can accept campaign contributions from folks who have cases before the court. That is frightening. I mean, I can't even imagine. It's legal bribery is what it is. It may not be bribery in the illegal sense, but we've legalized bribery. And those kinds of things need to stop, and that is what's at stake in this election. I mean, it's that simple. It's that if you are part of a lawsuit against a corporation who has wronged the people, that corporation could be giving the justices who are deciding a case, all kinds of money. And how can you ever trust in a legal system to be fair where that's the case? So it's not just about this set of laws and this situation that we're in with Act 10 and voting rights and all sorts of stuff. It really is about your day-to-day life, too. If your child is poisoned by lead paint and you want to sue the company that put that lead in that paint, even though it's year 2013, and what the heck were they doing putting lead in that paint? And that case makes it to the Supreme Court. You do not want somebody who is bought and paid for by this very same corporation who put the lead in that paint deciding your case. And that is how simple it is. That is why we need to balance back, restore justice and fairness on the Supreme Court. I guess, I don't know where we're at time-wise. I'm trying to find time. I don't know what time I started, so I don't know if you want me to keep speaking here or cut off.
Okay, we're going to end hard and fast at 7:45.
Okay.
I want to make sure folks are...
Make sure it's time for questions. Okay, so I'll talk for another minute or two, and then we'll go to questions. I don't want to keep rambling on too long. I feel like I could talk about this forever. So I want to talk a little bit about, again, getting back to that, so how do we win? I had somebody stop by my office today, somebody from the Economologh Progressives group was in Madison, and they stopped by my office and said, can Falone win this? And I said, absolutely. But it's not easy. It's going to take a lot of work. We are up against big money. Prior to the primary, Club for Growth spent over $100,000 on TV ads. They've already dumped in another $300,000 plus that we know about. And that's what we know about, because remember, they don't have to report all this. So we hear when they do media buys, what they're spending and all that good stuff. But this isn't just the money that Rogansack is raising. These are people independently putting these ads on TV. Unfortunately, for a lot of voters, they don't come to meetings like this. They don't hear us talk about why this race is important. They just know that Pat Rogansack is going to be tough on crime, and by golly, that's a good thing. That's what they get from those ads. I mean, and every Supreme Court ad you see, it's never this person's going to be fair in deciding these cases. It's always going to be tough on crime. And to be honest with you, it's a teeny weeny little bit of what the Supreme Court does. They're not in the circuit courts hearing criminal cases. Rarely do criminal cases make it to the Supreme Court. Certainly there are aspects of criminal cases, things about things being accepted into evidence, things like that do make it there. But the reality is the Supreme Court has very little to do with whether there's crime in your town or not. But that's what those ads say. And people like to vote for people who are tough on crime. I don't know why. I guess we all want to be safe. But that's what people like. So they need to be hearing from you, from me, from every volunteer, from every activist, from their friends, from their neighbors. It's really important that you vote, and this is why. It's not just about crime. Here's all these other things. Ed Falone isn't going to be any, less tough on crime than Pat Rogansack. She's not out fighting crime. Sure, she has her concealed carry permit, but she's not out there doing it, you know? This is really about bigger issues. This is about whether or not we have access to the core tenets of our democracy. This is about whether the system of checks and balances is in place. So, how can you help? I'm not sure what efforts groups in Janesville specifically have going on, but I will tell you that if you're interested in volunteering and aren't hooked up with another group that's working on it, United Wisconsin has virtual phone banks. You can actually contact us, we'll get you a login. All you need is a computer, the internet, and a phone. And you get on the internet, you log into our little virtual phone bank system. It gives you people to call, it gives you a script. The people you're calling are people who we've ID'd as good prospects who might or might not vote. These are folks who are on our side, or should be on our side. Most of them will be on our side. But folks who have a spotty history of voting in spring elections. You know, we know that the people like me who really geek out on this, and I vote in every spring election, I get excited about it. I know the people working my polling place. I can tell you I know them by name. I know what they like to eat. I know what they get at the bake sale. And I know that in February and April, I'll often go in there and have a conversation with them because there isn't a line of people trying to vote. But we don't need to reach people like me. I'm convinced I'm there. Most of you probably fall into that category. But there are a lot of people who vote sometimes in spring elections. Somebody comes and knocks on their door, makes a compelling enough case, and they happen to have nothing else going on election day, and they'll vote. We need to reach every single one of those people. And we need to talk to them about why it is so critical that they vote in this race. Kloppenburg's turnout was an anomaly. When I talked about that under 800,000 turnout that we had in Abramson's race, that's more typical of a spring election Supreme Court race. That is what we usually see. Kloppenburg was an anomaly because people were super engaged. Everyone was up at the Capitol. I mean, my God, I was seeing Kloppenburg on signs at the Capitol. You never see a Supreme Court justice's name on a sign anywhere, let alone people marching around with it, you know? So people were very engaged. We need to. What's that?
You did have Kloppenburg here.
Super, and she's wonderful. And she's now a circuit court judge in Dane County. Circuit court or appeal court?
Appeal court.
Appeals court, thank you, sorry, I got my courts mixed up there.
She was unopposed.
Yeah, she ran unopposed, but it's fabulous to have her on our appeals court. We are pleased about that. But that was an anomaly, but we can replicate. The fact that something's an anomaly doesn't mean that it's not replicable. It means that it is possible. And while she didn't win, that was a darn close election, a few votes one way or the other, or a few votes that may have been in a plastic bag somewhere, may never have existed, whatever your theory is on what happened. A few votes one way or the other could have tipped that. I mean, it was a minuscule difference. We need to replicate that turnout. If you had asked me before the Kloppenburg race, could we double our turnout? Because we almost doubled the turnout from the Abramson race. Somebody said, you think that next time there's a Supreme Court race, we could double our turnout? I would say, yeah, right. I'd love to. You tell me how and I'm on it. But realistically, I would have thought not likely. Well, now we know it's possible. Now we know that we can have 1.5 million people vote in a Supreme Court race. We also know that we can probably keep working our way up from there. But it means a lot of work. It means keeping people engaged. It means you all staying engaged, but it also means you all working to engage the people you know. I always think of those shampoo commercials, and I'll wrap up with this. When I was a kid, I can't remember the name of the brand, maybe it was Brack, something like that, but shampoo commercial. And there was a woman standing on the screen. I was a kid in the late 70s, early 80s. Woman standing on the screen, and she's like, you know, and I tell 2 friends, and they tell 2 friends, and they tell 2 friends, and suddenly you see all of the people multiply. That really is the formula for winning elections. If I tell 2 friends, and each of them tells 2 friends, and each of their 2 friends tells 2 friends, suddenly everybody's voting. So that really is the magic formula. If everyone in this room tells 2 friends, we've tripled our power. But if every one of those people you tell goes and tells 2 friends, we've now tripled, I think, 6 times our power, something, 3 times 3 times 3. Anyway, without getting into my old statistics classes, which were really no fun at all, I'll leave it at that. But I hope everybody will get engaged. I hope that you all understand the importance of this race, but also can articulate that to others, can talk to other people about why it's so important that they vote in this race, whether it's making phone calls, whether it's knocking on doors, or whether it's simply talking to your next door neighbor. Thank you.